Hello guys, and welcome back to another video. The time has come for me to talk again about Yuki Yuna is a hero. These videos on the series have never done well, so why am I still doing them? Because I fucking love this series. But today I'm not here to gush about the impeccable writing. Rather, I'm going to punch a hole in the biggest flawed area within the series. That being the Great Mankai Chapter. But what is the Great Mankai Chapter? Well, it isn't as simple as just a third season. Yuki Yuna is a Hero started out as an original anime released in 2014. Then we jump over to light novel releases with Sumi Washiro as a Hero, a prequel set 3 years before YuYu, giving Togo and Sonoko's backstory. Then we get another light novel series being Nogi Wakaba is a Hero, a beefy side story that is set 300 years before the events of YuYu and covers some of the very first heroes, as well as the first, if you include Shikitori Utena, is a Hero's bonus chapter. And last of the light novels we get for a while, we get Konosuke Mebuki is a Hero. While that novel series is wrapping up, we start getting an adaptation of Sumi Washiro is a Hero that starts up our second season. Sumi Washiro is adapted in 6 episodes, and then after it was finished, we got a second half, another 6 episodes titled under the Hero chapter. It was a direct sequel to the original Yuki Yuna anime, and serves as a conclusion to the series. This is an amazing ending to the series. Not to gush on writing, but it's a very clean resolution where they completely eradicate what had created the conflict all throughout the series. They established a start with Nogi Wakaba, then created the end with its Hero chapter. There was still room for some stories, such as the case with the Hero History Apocryphas, which is 3 extra side stories, 2 coming from the events of Wakaba's chapter, and 1 set 30 years in the future. But then there was the Great Mankai Chapter, which for a long time we didn't know what it would be. We knew it would follow the original YuYu cast from what the promotional material shown, but the series was concluded and we know there isn't anything that happens in between the events of the OG and the Hero chapter. Us fans were hoping for whatever they would do, it would be smart and wouldn't besmirch a flawless series. And well, the Great Mankai Chapter released, and nobody would have predicted what they have done. Episode to episode, you didn't know what you would get. The Great Mankai Chapter was a sequel, but it was also an adaptation of Nogi Wakaba, as well as Kusunoki Mebuki. But it was not good at adapting either. And now for the main point of the video. Today I'll be dissecting all 12 episodes and talking about all the failures they made in adapting, as well as the rare W's they had in writing this story. Kicking it off, first episode is really chilled back. It only gives a very light taste of what's to come at the end of the episode. Most of the runtime is just focused on giving a chill slice of life experience to the main YuYu cast. After mentioning certain events in the camping scene, you'll learn the events of this episode are set between the events of the original Yuki Yuna show and the Hero chapter, being after Yuna's recovery and being right before Togo accepts herself to be a sacrifice. I think most fans were generally happy with this episode. It didn't mess with the story at all. It was great comedy relief and has good character detail, showing Sonoko really hyper and extra, which makes sense since she's finally not bedridden. We also have a serious moment of Togo talking to Sonoko after losing her memory and forgetting about Gin. It's a really good addition to the series overall. It gives more value to the shot choices at the very end of the show. To give credit to this chapter, when it adds portions to YuYu's story, it does it pretty well. The problem comes when it starts to adapt other material. The end of this episode does show the introduction of the Sentinels and that they will be in some way adapting Konosuke Mebuki's chapter. Now we see the problems show up. Episode 2 through 4 adapt most of Kusunoki Mebuki is a Hero, adapting 6 of the light novel chapters and leaving out the 2 epilogue chapters to be adapted later within the Great Mankai chapter. So for this, they didn't have to cut most of the content from the light novels, and they were able to keep most of the main events intact, which you can't say for later parts within this series. But this is really a footnote version of what happens in the light novel. As well, we lose a lot of dimensionality of the character cast. Of our supporting sentinels, Suzume, Shizuku, and Yumiko, you only get a bit of their main characteristic. Suzume being a crybaby who begs for protection, Shizuku with her dissociative identity disorder, and Yumiko with her pompous attitude and rivalry towards Mebuki. I'll kick it off with Yumiko. Her character has it the best off, probably because she wasn't the strongest character to begin with. But most of her shining moments comes from chapter 4, where you see that she has a very rational level head and is able to make Mebuki reflect on her actions. I feel in the final fight in episode 4, you get to see some of that rational level thinking, and it accomplishes similar development. Also notably, within the light novel, she ends up gravely injured in the final fight, and she's used to build this tension up that maybe one of the Sentinels had died. Next is Suzume. She's one of my favorites, and I may be a bit biased with her. I do think they capture her comedy relief pretty well in the anime, but you do lose a key moment in her realizing something about herself. While the anime makes no note of it, the Sentinels were all ranked in their power 1 through 32, with Suzume being ranked 32. But they make note that she has extremely impressive instincts that end up keeping Mebuki alive a lot of the time. While she doesn't really develop self-confidence and she stays this crybaby the entire time, you always see in her actions that she's very brave. They do accomplish this with her diving to save Mebuki, but I do really miss that they didn't fully adapt her portion of the time with the original heroes. That moment in the light novel is much longer, as she asks the heroes for a request to help her become more brave. And the conclusion comes that her being scared coexists with her being brave. And through all this time, she has been very brave already. Lastly, we have Shizuku, who I really think is done dirty, as they don't explain anything about her character. She changes subtly, and they refer to her as Scary Shizuku. In the light novel, before she even has this moment, you learn that she got a fucked up background. Before they reveal her having dissociative identity disorder, we learn that her parents committed double non-alive. Hopefully you guys know what I mean. Of course, can't say it. YouTube censors got me there. Then you get to see that when they are struggling in combat, her other personality comes out. This cut from the light novel really sucks, as it's a very well written character with DID, and Shizuku becomes more attached to Mebuki for caring and being a friend to both of her identities, when she had struggled to make any friends before. It's a moment in the light novel that got me teary-eyed, so I'm sad it was cut. Lastly, we have to talk about the main character, Mebuki. I can also talk about Aki, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to leave it to Mebuki, because as the main character, I really have to judge the quality of this adaptation about how they end up adapting her. She has so much development out of any character within the Yuki Yuna series, and they kind of fail to fully capture it, which, with the restraint of time, makes sense. Mebuki starts off as honestly an asshole, but then she develops into a caring person like every other character. The way they worded it was that her development was roundabout. She sacrifices her caring of others as she deems it a waste in working on oneself, and then learns that is a crucial value in what makes a hero, as she develops this care naturally. I think they do a disservice chopping off her final moment and changing it. While in the anime, Mebuki ends up hospitalized, instead it was Yumiko. So that in that time at the end of the battle, Aki ends up talking to Mebuki and says that if an opening as a hero comes up, she would be the first to get it. And this is the grand moment for her, as we see in the beginning, she was pissed to not be nominated as a hero, but in this conversation, Mebuki completely rejects this offer from the Taisha, and she says that the title of hero given by them is meaningless, as throughout the series, the Sentinels came to appreciate her and call her a hero, and that title of hero is all she needs. We completely lose this in the anime. I think this is one of the biggest losses in Mebuki's chapter. Oh, you thought that was bad? We haven't even started talking about Wakaba's chapter. Nogi Wakaba was adapted from a light novel that was 22 chapters, compared to Mebuki's 8. So did we get more episodes proportionate to what Mebuki got? No, we got 4 episodes. Oh boy, now we're really talking about the botched adaptation. It's not even 4 episodes. They started out on episode 5 and end on episode 8, but they use half of those episodes for other purposes. This is closer to 3 episodes. But just to start, we start adapting Wakaba's story from more than halfway through the actual events in the light novel. And this just hurts to say, but they completely cut Tamako and Anzu from the story. They're alive for almost 300 pages, but they start with them dead. Not even dying, just dead. And I'm honestly surprised to not see as much hating on this from the fanbase, because holy shit, I loved Tamako and Anzu's character. They were written as these attached at the hip characters that were inseparable, both meeting each other during the Great Catastrophe and instantly becoming friends. Tamako being this rambunctious, tomboyish type, and Anzu being a shy bookworm. an opposites attract situation. You learn that Anzu has always been frail and got sick, making her stay back in school. She wasn't able to make friends and really dove into books, loving stories of princesses being protected. And that was the dynamic that came about with them. Their powers work well in this dynamic. Tamako has displayed a yo-yo that is mostly meant as a shield, but she used it more offensively, and Anzu has a crossbow and would sit in the back dealing damage and making sure there's no surprise attacks. I could go on. Again, this series is very long, so I can't summarize all the events that happen between these characters. I'll just keep it to their death scene, which takes up a lot of its chapter. They are struggling to fight the Scorpio Vertex, and while the other heroes are occupied, they end up in a vulnerable position. Anzu is knocked out, and Tamako dives in to protect, keeping a shield between them. Anzu does come to, but she can't move. She's stuck in place and can only fire arrows at the enemy. They try to convince the other to save themselves, but neither is willing to budge. Ends with Tamako's shield being punched through and both Tamako and Anzu being skewered by the vertex. And honestly, I can't beat how it's written at the end, so I'm just going to read it to you. And yet they were still alive. They grasped each other's hands as to make sure they were still there. They were losing their sight, hearing, and capability to think. Everything. Faced with their impending deaths, Tamako and Anzu grabbed each other's hands. The sensation of the other's hand was the one thing they had left. As her consciousness faded, Tamako thought to herself, "The next time I'm reborn, I want to be with Anzu. It'll be nice to be real sisters." Even without exchanging words, Anzu wished for the same thing. "If I were to be reborn, I'll pray to be with Tamako. I'm sure we can be real sisters next time." Yes, I was bawling my eyes out when I read this. Sorry again, but this death scene just hits different. So of course, I'm salty when they cut this completely. All we get is them holding hands in death in the anime. And this just steamrolls the problems, as this moment is what creates the tension between Wakaba and Shikage, which makes Wakaba seem like this unsociable asshole. In the light novel, both these characters are equally distraught by these characters' deaths and both lock themselves up in their rooms, mourning the deaths alone. They make Wakaba so cold in this scene, with her being made to keep face in this moment. Notably, they had the shift where Wakaba develops because a lot of her character conflict where she struggles with her values as a hero comes resolved in a chapter earlier on where Anzu and Wakaba take a trip outside the castle. I see a little why they have to make these shifts, but knowing exactly how it was done better, it just hurts to see it here. Shikage's character isn't unscathed either, as a lot of the reasoning behind her actions is completely cut, and you have to end up extrapolating a lot to understand the motive behind her actions. There's no point in the anime where there isn't tension between Shikage and Wakaba. That makes the line in Shikage's death about actually liking her feel weird. Shikage starts out cold and doesn't want to follow Wakaba's command. They eventually come together and they have a good relationship between each other, and then the dark side of Shikage is really what creates the rift. I guess this is important, but a lot of Shikage's actions are created by the dark thoughts created from using her power. While it isn't explained, in the anime at least, the Mankai system works by you absorbing the fairies into your body. The fairies are quite different from the cute little mascot characters you see within the original Yuki Yuna, and rather the fairies are just demons that these characters are absorbing into their body, which side effects include the dark thoughts and hallucinations that you see without the series. The anime does distinguish that most of these actions by Shikage are caused by her overuse of Mankai, which I'll say you can debate whether this is good or not for the adaptation of the series. I think it is somewhat fair that the actions are her own, as she goes through a lot of shit, at least in the light novel. If you thought the anime was dark with Kyora's shit, oh man, the light novels will fuck you up. I personally don't want to go into the details around Kyora's character. I may want to save it for another video, because she really is such a complex and well-written character, but her story is filled with some really dark shit. Everyone abused her, but once she became a hero, that had changed. That reputation of being a hero made people respect her. Her whole self-worth is built upon this completely unstable base, and this story is a sad rise and destruction for her. I'm kinda happy how much lighter they made it within the anime. Yes, it is legit that dark within the light novel. I'm happy with how much they cut, as I think throwing us that far into the deep end would have been kinda tough. It is weird, but of the good things from this adaptation, I think cutting the dark stuff was a really smart move. When they tackle something dark, they better do it well, or else it's going to end up seeming senseless or feel edgy just to be edgy. I think with awareness to the time constraint, it was smart to cut the dark stuff, or else they would have just ended up being edgy for the sake of edginess. If they didn't fully dive into Shikage's abuse, they would have made it feel just an edgy backstory. Failing to establish the narrative purpose of how it establishes her self-worth would have been dire. Going back, I'm happy they left out Shizuku's DID backstory. Failing to establish Mebuki and Shizuku's relationship would have made the touching on a subject of mental health feel insensitive. I'm also happy they cut one chapter from Wakaba's story, which involves the reading of a diary in an underground mall. That shit is also depressing as well, and I think you really need everything from the story intact to make sure such a story doesn't twist into some dumb nihilistic junk. But finally, I'll give a break from roasting the Great Mankai Chapter. It's time to talk about some good things. First one will be a hot take all around, and that is that Takashimi Yuna's writing was perfectly fine within the anime, but that was not hard to do as she isn't a very well-written character to begin with. Even in the light novel, she kind of acts just like a ray of sunshine and doesn't have much struggles. I think because there simply isn't much there, it was easy to get the small little things she does have going for her. As well, we do have some anime original moments of some spiritual conversations. Episode 4 we got a moment between Gin and Togo, and in episode 8 we got a Yuna double feature. Nobody complained over these moments, and everyone was generally happy to see them. Togo getting to talk to Gin for a short moment right after she is sacrificed in the fire offering was nice. It makes sense for it to be seen. It reminds me of Deadpool 2, funnily enough, where Togo thinks it's time to pass on and pay for her mistakes, but she still has the purpose of being with the heroes, so they don't have to hurt anymore. As well as the Yuna double feature. It doesn't develop much of Takashima's character, but acts as a good extra insight into the working of Shinju-sama, as well as giving even more lovability to Yuki Yuna's character, as she is unwilling to pass off the curse to anyone else. Even though it feels hopeless in finding a happy resolution, she'd rather suffer than to ever have anyone else suffer. Hello, post-production noob here. Though this video is already very long, I did miss something very important, and I realized it going back for the editing. I failed to talk about probably one of the best written characters within this anime, being Aya. I know all the YuYu fans are screaming at me for almost completely ignoring her character, but I remembered in the end, and it's kind of ironic that I forgot, as probably she got added the most amount of content within the Great Mankai Chapter. So compared to everyone else, she by far gets the most added with little change. In the light novel, she doesn't have a lot of impact, and the sentinels that stand by Mebuki get most of the development, but the anime chooses to focus a lot on the fire offering, one event tied directly to Aya. They add the moment where Mebuki and Aya hang out to give Mebuki a little more character and charm, but to also make you feel bad when you learn this will probably be the last thing fun that she does before she gets thrown into the fire. But I think the biggest thing that we get is in episode 10, where they are trying to power up the tower. Aya's character is interesting for being the one character who is loyal to their religion and thinks very purely about God. And this isn't because she's a Miko, as we see plenty of Mikos in the series who aren't loyal to Shinju-sama. I don't really feel they ever really touch on this character until the anime, where Aya has to be challenged in her belief. The conversation between Aya and Mebuki is amazing. I love the dark and grim look of seeing the priest turn to dirt. It very directly challenges the philosophical values underlying a lot of religions. The concept that you pass on to a better place, but everyone actually fears to go to such a place. The scene peaks to many of the deeper ideas brought up throughout the series, and I goddamn love it. That's Aya. She's very well written, and you wish the rest of the characters within the Great Mankai Chapter got written as well as her. But that's it from me. Back to the past Nooberton. Finally, to wrap up, we have our final 4 episodes, which I have much less complaint over. Episodes 9 and 10 are adaptations of the epilogue for Mebuki's chapter, as well as redoing some of the ending within the final Yuki Yuna series. Episode 11 also fully remakes the ending of the hero chapter, and the 12th episode is completely original content. To start, episode 9 adapts the first epilogue chapter roughly, and while I have minor complaints with how they handled things, I want to say the main focus for the episode is handled well, that being Mebuki and Karen's interaction. While I think they should have made it more clear that Mebuki knew about the fire festival and how they ended up saving a hero, I think with all the changes made beforehand, it's impressive how well they kept it intact. The light novel had to be vague with events as to not spoil the events of the hero chapter, but now with that knowledge, we we get the whole event more closely tied to Karen's perspective. The fight itself is absolutely beautiful with its animation, and us fans are really eating good with that treatment of the scene. Last thing related to Mebuki is that we also do get an important nod with the tower. In the anime, it turns into a beam to hurt the heavenly gods and forms into a flower, and those attentive people may know it's the same flower as Shikage's. Which, in the light novel, the tower gets renamed in Shikage's name. In the chapter, they say they are going to fit Shikage's name back into history, no matter if it's going to take a while. Now to the remaking of the ending of the Hero chapter, which I think this is one of the best endings written in all of fiction, so you'd think I'd be quite hostile to any changes to it. But I'm surprisingly pretty happy with it. I think it's fair to argue which does it better. The visual nods are really good within that version, but not playing United Petals as the final soundtrack definitely hurts. I would say it really just feels like a director's cut version that we get to see. I don't really have any heavy critiques to the changes overall, just preferences, as there aren't any dramatic changes. Just a couple of different shots, added dialogue, and new key points in the visuals. And finally, the last episode. The best episode by far, which completely goes with the ramifications of all the events before. A scene that always leaves an impression is Togo and Sonoko visiting Gin's grave. It's a really good concluding moment that was left in just as a still frame in the Hero chapter, but they turn it into a great moment for when, as well as a humanizing moment that was really needed for Aki. Aki, even though she is the most side characters in the series, she has a lot going on. And she's interesting to watch, as we get to see a character so deeply rooted to the Taisha. It's finally when Taisha is weak for losing many of their people, Aki finally gets to show her pain and breaks down in front of the two of them. Even in such a small moment, it shows so much character. I'll be leaving this episode for you guys to watch, as there is so much going on in it. But we see Sonoko take over as leader of a nation, with a new symbol being the Ho of Shiratori Utena, and we see the rest of the heroes living their best life. Itsuki as a singer, Fu as a scientist, and Karen, Togo, and Yuna all working together to scout out the ruins outside of Shinkoku. And that is Yuki Yuna is a Hero, the Great Mankai Chapter. Now to the point of all of this. After going through all the episodes, there is really only 1 or 2 episodes that are really good in adapting content or successfully adding to the series, which is a failing grade. But besides that, I still think this is a valuable entry to the series. Yuki Yuna wasn't originally one of my favorite series of all time. Admittedly, to get the full value of the series, you really have to dig deep into it and look at all of the material in the series. If you don't fully commit, you won't get it all. Even this long-ass video is a very compact version that doesn't suffice in getting all the nuance. Even if I made a video on each character individually, that wouldn't be a drop in the bucket. I am a hearty believer in this being one of the greatest pieces of fiction, and ever since fully diving in, I can't see myself ever lowering this in my rankings. But it wasn't always like this. There was a point where it was something I would call really good, but wouldn't pour my heart and soul into being a hardcore fan. It wouldn't even be in my top 10. But when did this change? Well, it wasn't the light novels, because I wasn't convinced to do all the reading. But then this came out. It really intrigued me. And even though I pointed out how it does all these things in this very shallow way, it still bring it up all the core values of the Yuki Yuna series and finally put a spotlight to them and made me pay attention. Then, after everyone said it wasn't as good as the light novels, it finally convinced me to end up taking the plunge and diving in, which really made me look at the whole series in a new light. So no, this isn't Yuki Yuna fans screaming at you to go read the light novels. Well, you totally should, but that isn't the point. It's to appreciate something for its flaws. And even though it does have a lot of flaws, it was still able to gauge my interest. And in a roundabout way, it's the reason why the worst entry in the series made me the biggest fan of it. And that's it. I'll spare you guys the long outro. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you liked and enjoyed. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.